Hi, I'm Gretchen Hirsch, and today I'm going to show you how to make a vintage-inspired square collar. So if you take a look at these dresses on the mannequin, I was really inspired by a 50s design that had a square collar, and I really studied vintage patterns to learn how to recreate this look. The really interesting thing about this collar is it's not just a flat square, it actually has seams in the corners to form a mitered effect. So it's a really great opportunity to play around with stripes, with trims, with border prints. So on this first dress, you can see how I used a stripe and I matched the stripe in the mitered corner to get that sort of chevron effect. On the dress next to it, this is one of my border print designs, and it has a small border of roses along one side and the larger rose border on the other selvage. So that small rose border is such a fun opportunity to use it on a small piece of a pattern or dress like this square collar. Anything that goes along a straight grain line you can use on this collar. So to my right here is another variation. I really want to do something all out nautical. So I did a sailor-inspired trim. I did the whole dress in red, one color, and then this white grosgrain really pops. So we're gonna talk a little bit about how to use ribbon trim on this collar as well. So I'm gonna go over to the table and show you what the pattern looks like. It's a little counterintuitive. It has 3 pieces, a collar front, which is cut on the fold, the square collar side, which goes from here to your back, and then the square collar back, okay? So it kind of forms this little sort of rectangle here. And if you look at the pattern, you can see a fold line down the center. So what happens is you cut this and then turn it under to form the fold at the bottom of the collar. So it's going to look like this. And you want to be really conscious of the notches, and this is your mitered corner right here. You want to be really conscious of the notches. They're very important on this pattern. You have 1 notch on the front and then 2 on the back. It seems easy to keep straight now, but once you start working with the pieces and you don't have the pattern pieces on them, it can get a little confusing. So I'm going to show you this collar cut out, and I'm going to start to pin it together so you can see what it looks like. All right, the collar front is a piece like this. So it was cut on the fold, and now you can see those single notches. Now, when I'm trying to orient myself with this collar, the next thing I'll do is take the side pieces. And like I said, I'm really looking for my notches. So I have the single notches here. I can see that it's going to connect to the front right here. And then you're going to have 2 back pieces. This dress has a back zipper, so you have to be conscious of that. There needs to be an opening up the back. Okay, and so I'm going to look for my double notches right there. So now I'm kind of keeping it all straight and organized on the table. So the first thing I'm going to do is start to pin the sides to the collar front. So right sides together, just like this, match your notches. And I'm going to pin along each side. And the way this is going to get sewn, and hopefully you can see how this is going to start to come together, is that we're going to sew along each little triangle point here. So here, pivot, and then along that side. So right sides together again. Oops, see, I've already gotten confused. All right, so your notches will guide you. So we're going to find that front notch, and we're going to match it here. All right, so you get the idea. I'm pinning along those little triangle points at the edges. And then you're also going to grab your collar backs. So the great thing about these pieces is that they are symmetrical. So you don't have to worry if you flip the left or the right, but you do have to worry if you're working with the front or the back. I'm going to pin that one there. Okay, so what you're going to have is this kind of weird looking strip. And at this point, it's kind of hard to believe that it's going to come together into that really beautiful mitered collar, but this is what it's going to look like here. You're going to take it to the machine and you're going to start sewing along those triangular points. So just use a regular stitch length here. You're starting at the very edge, using a 5/8 seam allowance. And I want my needle to be in the center. There we go. I'm using a regular stitch length, which for garment sewing is about 2.5. I'm gonna back stitch at each end. Okay, let's see if we can get going a little faster here. There we go. Sometimes sewing in heels is not that easy. Okay, you're gonna go to the point right here. You wanna be really careful about your pivot point. So stop at 5/8 with the needle down. And then turn this around. Actually, I wanna go one more stitch. So you can always swing, if you overshoot or undershoot, you can always correct it. I'm gonna go one more stitch. I'm gonna use the hand wheel and then pivot. So garment sewing seam allowances are almost always 5/8 of an inch. And that's just to give you extra if you need to alter the pattern in any way to fit your body. But I know that quilters always think that's a little crazy to use a full 5/8 of an inch. Okay, I'm gonna back stitch again. And then I'm gonna cut my threads. Okay, so I have sewn around the point of the collar here. And I'm gonna grab, I've already prepared another collar here, so you don't have to watch me do the whole thing. I've prepared this whole strip. I want to show you how the back points come together, that center back on the collar. Because once you've sewn this all in one long strip like this, the final thing you need to do is put these backs together and sew along here. So I feel like this is kind of the most confusing part of the collar, but once you see it come together, it makes sense. So just sewing right along that center back, just in a straight line. Okay, so obviously you would do that on both backs. And then I'm going to show you how I trim and press this. So let's go over and do this flat again. I've already trimmed my points here. You want to trim really close to your stitching at the point so that you don't have a lot of bulk in the pivot point, okay? Now the center back, I'm just gonna trim away from the seam allowance. Just like if you were doing a tote bag or anything like that, you're gonna wanna trim away from the center back. And then the seam allowance, you're gonna trim down to about 1/4 inch or even a little bit less. Now is where the magic happens. We're gonna start turning this right side out. Okay, there's center back. Now these points get kind of turned out like this, and you can, don't worry too much about pushing the points out yet. You can always use a pin or a point presser to do those later. So this is our collar center front here. And then there's the other back. Okay, so you can see how this formed this really cool mitered effect. The thing you want to really focus on now is pressing your collar. You need to get in between these layers and press those seam allowances open. So I'm going to take my iron and I'm just going to press the seam allowances open. It's a little tricky because you have to get right in between the layers. So you have to do one side and then turn it over and do the other side of each point. Really take your time with this step and just give yourself, don't do it when you're tired either, is my other tip. Give yourself a lot of time to just really get a nice, clean, mitered press on there. And you can also give it one just press flat here in the corner. Okay, so you can see how this is gonna come together to form a really cute little square collar. Now there's some fun things you can do with this collar like we talked about with the dresses on the mannequin. One of my favorites is the sailor trim. So using ribbon along the edge like this. So you can do 2 strips of ribbon on each side to form that sailor effect. And you're gonna wanna just turn in the edges of the ribbon and then top stitch. I love this velvet like pink on pink thing going on here, so I'm definitely gonna finish sewing this dress. Okay, so, and you would definitely want to use pink thread for that so that it would blend in. Let's talk a little bit about stripes. If you want to cut this with stripes, you have to be very careful about your matching. But I'm happy to report that it is not hard at all with this pattern. Because you have that fold line down the center of your pattern, what you're going to want to do is use the fold line as your guide to always match it up to the same stripe on your fabric. So this blue and white striped linen, I'm going to align my fold line with either a blue or a white stripe. And that way I know that I'll always have a blue stripe, for instance, at the outer edge of the collar. So that when I go to sew it, and I sew that corner, when I turn it right side out, and I haven't trimmed this one, so you'll see that it's still a little bulky, but you'll see how it kind of magically matches the stripes and it miters itself. This is a really fun and easier than it looks vintage inspired collar, and I hope you love making this mitered square collar for yourself.